What up, everyone? This is Mr. Lord, Dr. Professor, Dark Joker, and today we're going to cover the rise and fall of Dave Filoni, the creative head at Lucasfilm. You know how he rose in popularity among Star Wars fans and how his reputation has dropped. So all that said, on with the video. First off, we're going to go over all the various shows that Filoni has worked on before he was on Star Wars. So he worked on King of the Hill, Mission Hill, the Oblongs, Chemo Supremo, Kim Possible, Fillmore, Lilo and Stitch, the series, Dave the Barbarian, American Dragon Jake Long, and Avatar Last Airbender. And while he was on Avatar, he left Nickelodeon after George Lucas offered him a job to help him develop Star Wars The Clone Wars. Now for his Star Wars stuff. So starting out, we'll go over The Clone Wars, the movie, and seasons 1 through 6. So Filoni is credited as the director of the movie and the supervising director and executive producer of the TV show. He's famous for creating Ahsoka Tano, Anakin Skywalker's Padawan, and that character was not as well liked early on, but her reputation improved early on as her character improved, as she became less whiny, actually developed as a soldier, because war, it makes or breaks people, and obviously Ahsoka was able to improve over the course of the war. Anyway, so the movie released in theaters on August 15th, 2008. Then the TV show, seasons 1 through 5, aired on Cartoon Network from October 3rd, 2008 through March 2nd, 2013. After Disney bought Lucasfilm, they didn't want a competitor having one of their properties on their network, so they didn't renew the Cartoon Network contract after season 5. And so when season 6 was made, it was released on Netflix on March 7th, 2014, because Disney Plus didn't exist at the time. And so Clone Wars was gone for a while. There were still a bunch of unaired arcs, some of which have still never been animated, but a lot of fans were not happy after the show ended. Now we're going to go into this how he became considered the second coming of George Lucas during the time of Disney Star Wars, which I would say started in April 25th, 2014, when the Expand Universe was declared non-canon. Star Wars Rebels. So Filoni is credited as the creator of this show, and it aired from October 3rd, 2014 through March 5th, 2018. And when it was airing, you had a lot of the early novels, and you also had the sequel trilogy movies, specifically Force Awakens and Last Jedi. And when you compared the two at the time, Rebels was seen a lot higher regard by the fans than the sequel trilogy was. So, Filoni's reputation in comparison to Kathleen Kennedy, Ryan Johnson, and Jar Jar Abrams, Filoni's reputation was rising. And it's not known how much involvement Kathleen Kennedy had. Since it was a cartoon show, it's possible she didn't have much involvement, and people believe that was a big reason why Rebels was successful, because Kennedy was not believed to be involved. And especially, after season 4, when it ended after daring the fallout to The Last Jedi, and basically what happened with Last Jedi was what they did to Luke, and how Rebels, respected legacy characters that did appear. It, Filoni was very much respected by most of the fans. That doesn't mean there weren't criticisms. There were plenty of criticisms for the show. The animation's a downgrade in comparison to Clone Wars. And, it's a lot more, you know, kiddish. Now, it did get darker over time. Like, Hayden Jarrus burns to death. And then, all the stuff with Darth Maul and Grand Admiral Thrawn, and Thrawn was seen as, kind of not as great as he is in the EU, and I would agree with those criticisms. I'm still a fan of this show, despite what happens after it, which I'll get into later. Forces of Destiny. So Filoni is credited as the creator and executive producer. It's a series of shorts that aired from July 3rd, 2017 through May 25th, 2018. And it's forgettable, and at least the early episodes were marketed as like forces female because they try to say, oh, it focuses on the female Star Wars characters. I'm like, okay, fine, it's a good show. And then I don't know how much involvement Filoni actually had with it because of his other stuff, like Rebels. So I don't know how much involvement he actually had. So due to that and due to the forgettability of the show, this is seen as like a minor red flag on Filoni's reputation. Star Wars Resistance. So Dave Filoni is credited as the creator and executive producer of this show, and it was heavily inspired by anime and Filoni's grandfather's experiences in the Second World War. And story starts shortly before Force Awakens, ends at some point between Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. It aired from October 7th, 2018 through January 26th, 2020. And as far as the quality goes, it had some improvement there in season one. It was still pretty bad. Like the Hazian Prime explosion is handled so much better in this show compared to Force Awakens because Kazuda, being from Hazian Prime, actually shows some emotion. Seeing Hazian Prime explode. Now, it doesn't mean I care about the character, but I'm just saying it handled that specific moment within Disney's timeline better. And and season two, it just got worse over time. I didn't even finish the second season because it just got so bad. And it's sequel trilogy era, so a lot of people didn't care. And as far as Filoni's involvement, I don't think he was heavily involved in the show because he had been working on Rebel season four during the development of this show and Mandalorian season one. So with Rebel season four, Mandalorian season one, I can't say how much Filoni was actually involved in Resistance, but it's possible he didn't have a lot. And with season two, you had the second season of Mandalorian and the seventh season of Clone Wars, so it's possible he did not do much for this show and kind of like let other people do it. I can't say personally. I never worked at Lucasfilm, so I don't know. But I don't really have much involvement, which is why this is seen as a not as big of a red flag on Filoni's reputation. That and because it's forgettable. As far as reception, results may vary as far as critics go. Fans, mostly negative, that it wasn't good. So yeah, I mean, there isn't much to say about this. It had so little effect. It doesn't really get brought up a lot. Mandalorian season one. So Filoni is credited as a director, writer, and executive producer of the show. And John Favreau's known as the creator. He and Filoni worked together on this show a lot, and this is the first live action show that Filoni had worked on. And he uses experiences from working on The Force Awakens and observing The Last Jedi to help him with, you know, knowing how to direct live action because he had only done animation. And Lucasfilm was able to get a lot of merchandise through the child, later known as Grogu, and more commonly known as Baby Yoda. And it received a lot of hype because it's Mandalorians, Boba Fett, Jango Fett, and anyone who read the EU, knew about Mandalorians and were hyped about this show. And it received a lot of positive reception from critics and fans, especially compared to Rise of Skywalker, because basically like Mandalorian season one airing around the same time where Rise of Skywalker released. So when you had those two in comparison, you know, Mandalorian season one was very well praised. And so that helped Filoni's reputation because you had one of his works giving high praise while project that's more associated with Kathleen Kennedy, receiving a lot of criticism, and that that was around when there was still a lot of demand for Kathleen Kennedy to be fired after The Last Jedi. After Solo lost money, then with this movie, which Rise of Skywalker was the worst Star Wars movie ever, in my personal opinion. But yeah, so this show aired from November 12th, 2019 through December 27th, 2019. And it received very high ratings. It was a launch title for Disney Plus, and it really helped the streaming service. Clone Wars Season 7. So this was announced at San Diego Comic-Con on July 19th, 2018, and a lot of hype came from this because people missed the Clone Wars. And it aired from February 21st, 2020 through May 4th, 2020. And the three arcs, amongst all the ones that were unaired, the three arcs that they did were the Bad Batch arc, Soka's Walkabout, and Siege of Mandalore. And Bad Batch and Siege of Mandalore both received a lot of praise. Soka's Walkabout, not as much, because there are some changes made. So in the original story, there was a character named Nixel Kami who is going to be a love interest for Ahsoka, and they replaced him with the Martez sisters. And the story was kind of meh, so people didn't care too much for that arc. But the Bad Batch arc, Siege of Mandalore arc, both received a lot of praise. And with the sequel trilogy having recently finished, you know, basically when you had Clone Wars Season 7 and Mandalorian Season 1, you know, basically people were just making a lot of comparisons between Dave Filoni and Kathleen Kennedy, and saying Filoni should replace her as the head of Lucasfilm. Basically, he was being called the second coming of George Lucas. I myself believed that to be the case at the time. And, people were having hope for Star Wars that once Candy's contract ran out, or if she got fired, that Filoni would take her place and save Star Wars. Mandalorian Season 2. So this aired from October 30th, 2020 through December 18th, 2020. This had the first live action appearances of Ahsoka Tano and Bo-Katan Kryze, who both came from the Clone Wars, and also had the first live action appearance of the Dark Troopers, who came from the video game Dark Forces, which is from the EU era. And this show also had the return of Boba Fett, and in the episode where he makes his Disney debut, he actually acts like Boba Fett, like the cool bounty hunter who very good fighter and could just like murder some people. And was he as villainous as was in Empire Strikes Back and Turn Jedi? No, but he's a bounty hunter. He's basically, whether he's good or evil, it depends on who's paying. That's kind of how Boba Fett is. And this show also had Luke Skywalker in his prime and show his hero just cutting down some dark troopers. And then with the fifth episode of this show, this had a tease for Grand Admiral Thrawn because Ahsoka was looking for him. And this season, basically with all stuff I said about this season, it gave fans a lot of hope because people were like, "Holy crap! Legacy characters are respected," and people had the most hope that they've had since The Last Jedi. Now we know what happened after it. Gina Carano was fired, and she should not have been fired. And so, people were concerned, but people would credit her getting fired to Kathleen Kennedy, not so much to Filoni and Favreau. And, Filoni and Favreau's reputation was very high after this season. And, I myself was a big fan this season. Bad Batch Season 1. So Filoni is credited as the creator and executive producer of this show. So season one aired from May 4th, 2021 through August 13th, 2021. And this had mostly positive reception from critics and fans. The main criticism was in regards to the characterization of Omega, who's like a female clone of Jango Fett, and like Boba did not have the, aging alterations, and so basically she was considered to be annoying. I agree with that criticism, but the actual Bad Batch characters were considered to be very cool, and so it was seen as like a decent sequel to Clone Wars, and it got relatively decent ratings. So people were still pretty hopeful that you know once Kathleen Kennedy's contract ran out, that this show could be a sign of more to come from Filoni if he was, you know, given complete reins. All right, now I'm going to go into the rumors regarding Dave Filoni. So, Kathleen Kennedy, she has been hated by the fans since The Last Jedi. Now, some people hated her as far back as Force Awakens or as far back as Disney ending the EU. Me. But for most fans, myself included, it was The Last Jedi that turned us against her. Now, I was not happy about ending the EU. The EU is so much better than what Disney's done, but I was like, okay, let's see what they do. Then The Last Jedi happened. And then, so at some point, there were some rumors reported by Overlord DVD that, Filoni and Favreau were going to use the World Between Worlds, which is a plot point from season 4 Rebels, to erase the sequel trilogy and basically all of Disney Star Wars from existence. And there was a civil war rumored between a faction led by Filoni and Favreau and then another faction led by Kathleen Kennedy. And so various news outlets and other YouTubers were discussed the rumors and reached out to their sources if they had any, try to see what they know and basically see if there's any validity to the rumors and what the odds are about anything happening. And while it's going on, a lot of fans were seeing Filoni as the savior of Star Wars if Kennedy's employment at Lucasfilm had ended, which obviously it hasn't at the time of this recording. Have you heard the tragedy of Dave Filoni? It's not a story Disney would tell you, but I'm going to tell it to you right here. And their name for the tragedy of Dave Filoni is Ryan Kindle Was Right. The Book of Boba Fett. Filoni is credited as a director, writer, and executive producer on this show, and it aired from December 29th, 2021 through February 9th, 2022. This had mostly negative reception from fans and mixed to negative reception from critics. The portrayal of Boba Fett and his subordinates as like heroic criminals on Tatooine, that was criticized a lot because Boba Fett's meant to be morally gray. He's a bounty hunter. He's whether he's good or evil depends on who pays. And Boba Fett was seen as like a cheap knockoff of like Talon Card, Smugglers Alliance from the expanded universe, because it looked like that's the kind of role they're going to give him for an heir to the Empire story, which I'll get into that later. And this was seen as like the first really big flag, major red flag for Dave Filoni, because people were like, "What the heck? You had the child leave Mando at the end of Mandalore season 2, but then you have the kid go back to Mando in a show that's not even Mando's, in basically a spin-off, not even in I mean, there was a lot of problems that happened with this show. Obi-Wan Kenobi, the show that killed Star Wars. So Filoni's created as executive creative counsel, so he was looked upon for advice as far as story goes. And it aired from May 27th, 2022 through June 22nd, 2022. And this had very low viewership because, all the stuff with Reva, then, you know, Obi-Wan and Vader meeting in between Revenge of the Sith and New Hope, which never happens. And, the fans were demonized before the show even premiered and were demonized throughout the show's airing. And then after the show, it doesn't get brought up as much as it used to be. The Last Jedi gets brought up a lot more than Obi-Wan, but this was seen as the final nail in Star Wars' coffin. Now, history will probably look upon Star Wars and say it died when Disney ended the expanded universe, and then Disney Star Wars died with Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I agree with that take. And basically, this show, it was so bad, fans like just decide just not watch anything that came after this. And you can see in the ratings of everything that came after this that Obi-Wan like significantly hurt those shows. Even the shows like Andor, which some people consider to be good. I personally don't, but Andor was affected by Obi-Wan because its ratings were awful. And Filoni's heavily marketed involvement with this show was seen as a major red flag. So some people were wondering whether or not he was actually as involved as was claimed, and some people were wondering if Disney was just trying to use Filoni's name to help them get higher ratings. Which it's not as if that wasn't a possibility. Disney would totally give a bunch of BS to try to help their ratings, but this was still seen as a major red flag on Filoni. The Mandalorian Season 3. This aired from March 1st, 2023 through April 19th, 2023. And this had very low viewership because it came after Obi-Wan. And so Din Djarin or Mando was replaced with Bo-Katan, where Din Djarin got the dark saber and had a claim to the throne of Mandalore, and basically he just gives it to Bo-Katan. And as far as reception, this had mixed to positive reception from critics and mostly negative fan reception. And the fans' opinions of Filoni were becoming more negative than they were, than during Mandalorian season 2. So this was like, I would say, was almost like the true start of the fall of Filoni. Ahsoka season 1. So Filoni's credited as a creator, writer, director, and executive producer of this show. It aired from August 22nd, 2023 through October 3rd, 2023. And like with Mando season 3, this had very low viewership because it came after Obi-Wan. As far as reception goes, this had mostly positive reception from the critics and very negative reception from the fans. Basically, the Thrawn, the New Republic, and the Death Troopers were turned into jokes. Like the way they did the zombie stormtroopers was so freaking retarded, and this show made Sabine Wren force sensitive with no explanation, which doesn't work because in Rebels she never uses the Force, and if she was force sensitive, Kanan would have noticed and trained her to be a Jedi, like he did with Ezra. But they try to say, oh, if you try hard enough, you can use the Force. Look, the Force connects all life in the universe within the Star Wars franchise. That doesn't mean everyone has access to the Force. And like if they said something like Sabine was possessed by someone who was Force sensitive, like Babeloff, based on what they were setting up in season 1 with some of the statues of the Morris gods, or like Darth Plagueis, or Vitiate, and Dedu or some other dark side being, some other villain, if she was possessed by evil force ghosts that used the force through her, that could make some sense and maybe something to work with. Or if this was like what the Knights of the Republic comics did, where he had a force sensitive who did not know he was force sensitive and used the force through someone else, and it looked like that this other person was force sensitive, but it was really someone else. Yeah, that was not a good plot point in the EU, at least not in that specific comic. And that's something they could have done through this show. Maybe say that like Ahsoka was using the Force through Sabine, or that's so who knows, like or like Hera and Kanan's son was, who knows, like they could. There's something they could have done maybe to explain it, but they didn't. They were like, oh, anyone can be a Jedi, and they're saying, oh, the Force is no longer determined by bloodlines. It never was. It never was. Being from a family associated with the Jedi does not automatically make someone force sensitive. I mean, heck, Theron Shan is a descendant of Revan Bastila Shan, and his mother Satel was the Grand Master. He was not force sensitive. And Lobaka, who is Chewbacca's nephew, was a Jedi, while as no one else in his family was. And then you had Ania Solo, who is a descendant of Jason Solo, aka Darth Kaitis, who, is not shown to be force sensitive. You know, basically like the only Skywalker Solo who's not known to be force sensitive outside, Han Solo. It's like you have Darth Vader, aka Anakin Skywalker, Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, Anakin Solo, Jason Solo, Jaina Solo, you know, or Tinelka Joe, Alana Solo. They're all shown to be force sensitive, but like Adia was not shown to be force sensitive. While you have Kate Skywalker, who's like or Ben Skywalker's descendant, or well, Luke's descendant, because people who don't know the you may not know who Ben Skywalker is. Anyway, but so being from a family that's associated with the Jedi does not make someone force sensitive, and being from a family that's not associated with Jedi does not make someone not force sensitive. The Force can be used by whoever is force sensitive, and it doesn't matter what bloodline they are, it doesn't matter where they're from. It's all determined by the will of the Force. And so through Sabine, they were trying to do the whole Force is female thing, and let's say a lot of people were pissed off, and this killed Filoni's reputation. Whatever fans were left saw Filoni as a traitor, and even many people who basically stopped watching Star Wars, but were still fans of Filoni, they saw Filoni as a traitor, and basically, like Filoni's reputation was gone, and he probably won't get it back. Now for some of the rumors that came out after Ahsoka. So Overlord DVD, he reported on a rumor that Filoni agreed to let Kathleen Kennedy kill Star Wars if Ahsoka was allowed to be a major character in Disney Star Wars. So rumors were that he basically sold out the franchise just so his character could have a major role. And it would not surprise me if that was true. The Acolyte. Yeah, we all know what happened with the Acolyte with the Power 1, Power 2, Power Mini, all that. We know we High Republic, we know all what happened to the Acolyte. And so Filoni, since he was the chief creative officer at the time, he approved the scripts for this show. And Leslie Headland called Filoni a mentor. So Filoni's reputation was already basically gone. And this just hurt it even more. It's like, you were a mentor for someone who made The Acolyte. Why should we ever trust you with Star Wars? So yeah, I mean, people don't like Filoni now, especially after this show, which was seen as like a victory lap for like everyone who was saying Star Wars was dead and everyone who had criticized Filoni. Basically, this seen as a victory lap of like vindication that, see, we were right. And people who were criticizing Filoni, they were right. I'm willing to admit that I was wrong about Filoni at the time. And here's some other content that came after Obi-Wan Kenobi that also had low views. Bad Batch seasons 2 and 3, Tales of the Jedi, Tales of the Empire, Vision season 2, where he was credited as special thanks. Zen Grogu and the Dust Bunnies, which was a short film, he was also credited special thanks for that. And Skeleton Crew, a show that came out recently with Jude Law. It was heavily compared to the Goonies. I didn't watch it, so I can't say much. I didn't really hear anything about it that excited me, so I don't really care to watch it. But basically, the views of these shows were so low because they came after Obi-Wan, and Filoni's reputation was very low by the time some of this stuff came out, so that affected the ratings as well. Now for some upcoming content that Filoni's involved with. So Ahsoka season 2, which I think there's a 50-50 chance of it being made, but if it does, it will likely involve Abeloth, who, for those who are not aware, so with the Morris gods or the ones, you have the father, son, daughter. Abeloth is the mother. Now she's not a celestial like the ones. Abeloth was a woman, so a human, who partook in these two rituals, like one the son did, one the daughter did, when Abeloth was close to death, because she aged faster than the ones who lived significantly longer. She decided to partake in those two rituals to help her live longer, and basically when she did, it turned her crazy. And basically she became so powerful, like the father, son, daughter would team up against her, and basically they created these two stations with the help of the Killix, who were basically giant space ants. So they created Sinkhole Station and Centerpoint Station, which those two together created this artificial space storm called the Maw. And basically, the planet that Abeloth was trapped on was like at the center of that storm, and basically she would be trapped there. And when when there was a lot of imbalance in the galaxy, she would escape, and they would have to trap her again. All that. And if and if both Sinkhole and Centerpoint Station were ever destroyed, she would be able to escape a lot easier. Spoiler alerts for Fate of the Jedi, because yeah. and so for a fun fact, for those who have seen Solo, that space storm that you see near Kessel, that's the Maw. So that's an artificial space storm in the EU. So, but anyway, they're probably going to do a bad version of Fate of the Jedi if they make season 2 of Ahsoka and try to give her like Luke's story, because Luke is very instrumental in the defeat of Abeloth and Fate of the Jedi. where he like basically he and Darth Krayt like project their minds into the Force itself, like fight Abeloth there while other people like kill like different vessels of hers. Anyway, it's a weird story, very interesting story that Disney will screw up. And they're probably gonna have the Grisk involved, which those are like Disney's versions of the Use and Fallen because Disney doesn't have the balls to do the real Use and Fallen. So Grisk are probably gonna have some role. I think my theory that the Grisk are gonna be like an army of nomadic aliens that serve Abeloth and like conquer other races in order to enforce her will. That's what I think's gonna happen. It like in Ahsoka. I think that's gonna be the plot point. That's I don't know if it's gonna be how involved that'll be in Heir to the Empire, which I'll get to that one later. But I think Ahsoka season 2 will probably be the grandest in scale, and you know, but if it gets made, I think there's a 50-50 chance it will get canceled. Now for Mandalorian Grogu, which that's the only project besides, you know, that's the only movie project that I think has 100% chance of getting made because it's about done or close to. I don't know how close it's done, but it's close enough to where I think they'll release it. And they want to see if they can get some merch off of Grogu. They ain't gonna get as much as they used to, especially after season 3. I think this movie will flop, but this movie has the highest odds of being a success as far as upcoming movies go. And Filoni, they're involved with the production, him and Favreau, and yeah, I don't think it's gonna be good. And Heir to the Empire, which is Filoni's movie, and so it's gonna deal with Thrawn, and I don't know if Luke, Han, Leia are actually gonna be in it. That's been rumored, but I but it wouldn't surprise me if they're not in there or if they just appear in cameo and they're replaced with like other characters. Since Boba Fett's gonna be like Talon Card, and I don't know if Ahsoka will be in it, but basically like if this movie releases, I think it will definitely flop. Like mostly EU fans know the phrase "heir to the empire," and they're pissed. So normies may have heard the name Heir to the Empire because of EU fans telling about the greatness of that novel, which I will tell you about its greatness. It is a freaking great novel. Amongst all the Star Wars books that I've read up to this point, the only novel that's better than Heir to the Empire is Darth Plagueis. So I recommend reading it. And Darth Plagueis as well. Heck, read the entire Heir to the Empire trilogy. Like that is like if you were to talk about what's the best trilogy in Star Wars besides the original trilogy, the Heir to the Empire trilogy makes a good freaking argument. But the movie will most likely suck. Now for a new Jedi Order. That's the name given to Rey's. Well, it's not an official name; it's more unofficial. Most people are assuming that's going to be the name, and EU fans are pissed because that's the novel series that involved the Yu Vong, which they're not going to use the Yu Vong. They may do Darth Krayt and or to have Legacy, so I wouldn't be surprised if Legacy was the name of that movie as well. But a lot of people are unofficially calling it New Jedi Order. And so, like Ahsoka, this has like a 50-50 chance of being made. I don't know how all the legal contracts work, so I don't know how much you have to have done before you're legally required to release it. But but if they're not legally required, I think there's a chance this could be canceled. And I guarantee this one will flop. A Ray movie's not going to make money. Like people were like, oh, but the sequel trilogy made profit. Yes, because Star Wars wasn't considered to be dead. I mean, that's just a fact. Some people still had hope for Star Wars. That is why Rise of Skywalker made profit. Solo lost money because it came very quickly after Last Jedi, and you had Infinity War and Deadpool 2, taking away a lot of revenue. So I mean, those movies, which are both better than Solo, you know, you know, beat it in the box office. And as far as New Jedi Order goes, this will flop. I don't know if there's gonna be another Star Wars movie that makes profit under the people currently in charge. And so, Andor season two. So, Filoni, being the chief creative officer, had to improve the scripts. Now, I don't know how much involvement he had in season one. If he had any, he may have just not been too involved. Because I don't know what his rank was at the time of season one. So I don't think he had a lot of involvement. But season two, he had to improve the scripts. So he does have some involvement there. Now, as far as what all is going to happen in season two, I could see Agent Callus being involved. They may show Callus's official recruitment into the rebellion. For fans of Rebels, Agent Callus was an Imperial 8 ISB agent who you know fought Phoenix Squadron a lot, and during season three is revealed to be a spy for the rebels. Now we don't know exactly when he defected, and then he officially joins at the end of season three, and during season four he's like openly a rebel. But so I can see that being involved. I can see some other rebels characters, because especially if Filoni's involved, he would want to put a lot of his stuff possibly playing a role, especially during the OT time period. So I don't know how good Andor season two would be. I was not a fan of season one, so I think it will suck. I think with and Andor season one suffered in the reigns from Obi-Wan. So when you have that, and now with the Acolyte having happened and Ahsoka happening, I mean, Andor season two's ratings are could be really bad. And so, it may not go well for them. And then, Tales of the Underworld. This was a recently announced show. So there's 3 episodes that focus on Asajj Ventress, 3 episodes that focus on Cad Bane. It looks like they're trying to make them both sympathetic, which I don't like. I mean, Cad Bane is a bounty hunter. Like Boba Fett, a lot does depend on who's paying, but Cad Bane is more commonly associated with villains than the Jedi. So he is more villainous than Boba Fett. So he should not be sympathetic. If it's like Cad Bane just killing people, like just being a hitman, a brutal hitman, there's maybe they could do it, but I don't think they're gonna go that route. And Ventress, they keep trying to make her into a good guy. I'm like, Ventress is a witch. She's a dark witch. I mean, look, on Dathomir, lots of there are various witch clans. There are good witch. There are I guess you would call the clans light clans and dark clans. There are light clans, with Sini Mountain Clan being the most notable of them. They haven't been brought up in Disney, I don't think. Ventress is part of the Night Sisters, which is a dark clan. And she became a bounty hunter after leaving Dooku's service. So a lot of her stuff is determined by who's paying. But she is a villain. She was still a fugitive of the Republic during the later part of the Clone Wars. Even though she was a bounty hunter, she was still a fugitive and not liked by anyone in the Republic. No, yes, we were going to bring up Dark Disciple, where she was working with Quinlan Voss, but Ventress wanted to murder Dooku. And she taught Voss how to use the dark side in that book. Now, I haven't read that book. I do know some of the story. And yes, she fell for Voss and then, was stabbed and believed to be dead and was buried by Obi-Wan and Voss. Like, she was killed by Dooku and was buried. So unless she's like basically a reanimated or resurrected through like Night Sister magic, she should not be alive. I mean, it's Star Wars. Being stabbed is seen as barely an inconvenience, especially for female characters, as the show Ahsoka showed, and Obi-Wan in case of Reva getting stabbed. But I don't think it's going to be a good show. I ain't see Tales of the Jedi or Tales of the Empire. I don't think Tales of the Underworld's going to be a good show either. So yeah, there's not a lot to look forward to, like except if you want to make content. If you want to make content, you can get some joy at making content, but maybe not actually watching the stuff itself. But yeah, it really sucks for Star Wars right now. Now I'm going to go into my conclusions about, Filoni's career at Star Wars and, what his motivations are. So, as far as some of his early stuff from like up through Kathleen Kennedy's contract being renewed in late 2021. So I think Rebels seasons 1 and 2 of Mandalorian, Clone Wars season 7, and Bad Batch season 1. Basically, they were used to play both sides of the Star Wars fandom. So you had the anti Kathleen Kennedy faction and the pro Kathleen Kennedy faction. And so basically, the way the stories were structured, they were kind of standalone enough to where it didn't commit to either erasing or affirming Disney Star Wars, and the stories could have worked for either way. And so what I think he was doing was he was just building up his personal brand so that, you know, regardless of whatever, if Kathleen Kennedy or this story group at Lucasfilm was employed at Lucasfilm or not, he would have good job security and a lot of influence and basically like he basically just played ball. He just towed the line, I think, because and as far as potential changes in Lucasfilm, I think the earliest it could have been done would have been once Candy's contract expired. Because so let's start with episode 9. If Candy was fired before that, that would mean the next head of Lucasfilm's first movie would have been the end of a trilogy. And since basically that movie's production would have been mostly done while Kenny was there, basically the new head would have been blamed for something that was Kathleen Kennedy's fault. And, I don't think anyone will want that to happen to themselves. So, it would have been after the trilogy was done. And as far as the contract is concerned, well, if she was fired before the contract expired, there would have been a lot of backlash. And with everything that happened in 2020, 2021, I don't think Disney wanted to risk that. So I think the best case scenario would have been if they just let her contract expire and say we thank her, and she's elected to retire. That would have best case scenario. That's what would have happened. Now, as far as if change, I think for a while, I think there was like a 50% chance of changes being made. And, with the negative reception to The Last Jedi, the Solo losing money, negative reception to Rise of Skywalker, and then as far as Filoni's end goes, you had positive reception to Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2, and Rebels, and of course you had Bad Batch throughout, like early/middle part of 2021. And I think after Mandalorian season 2, that helped Filoni's chances because that gave a lot of fans hope, whereas a lot of stuff that's highly associated with Kathleen Kennedy did not. he'll do that. And because a lot of Filoni stuff at the time, people didn't associate with Kathleen Kennedy. So I think there's a 50-50 chance. Now, I think when you looked at everything that happened throughout 2020, 2021, I think, there was some, I hypothesized there was some back and forth, but, you know, between some of the heads at Disney, they were probably weighing their options. And as far as the rumors go, I think there were, if, if some of these people, if they have sources or what sources they have, I think basically Disney was letting anti-Kathleen Kennedy stuff go to anti-Kathleen Kennedy outlets, which was mostly YouTubers, and pro-Kathleen Kennedy stuff go to the pro-Kathleen Kennedy outlets, which have been a lot of your mainstream media, a lot of those shills that, get the gift bags at events. So I think they were doing that to weigh the options, what could be the most profitable, which would have been to get rid of Kathleen Kennedy, and what would get the most backlash. I think what happened is that they took into account the backlash and believed that Kennedy leaving Lucasfilm would cause a lot more backlash and cause them more problems. That's what I think happened, and so they decided to keep Kathleen Kennedy there. And as far as Filoni goes, I think once that decision was made, I don't know when that decision was made, but I think when it happened, I think he decided to choose Kathleen Kennedy over the paying customer. I mean, he made that decision, and he played along and was involved with as an advisory role for Obi-Wan and for acolytes, basically, and he contributed to the death of Star Wars. Now, if hypothetically, you know, he did save Star Wars, I think based on what some of the other stuff we've heard that he's been involved with in Lucasfilm, I think he would, if he was going to save Star Wars, it would have been to further his own career. Not, I don't know if it was necessarily out of his love of Star Wars, concerning some of the stuff he's done in the past in the recent years with Lucasfilm, and so I think he was just playing both sides and buying his time to further his own career. Yeah, you know, similar to Peter Peter Baelish from The Song of Ice and Fire and Sideways from the Unicron trilogy and Transformers, as seen in the pictures on this slide. And as far as the rumor that Overlord DVD said about Filoni agreeing to help Kennedy kill Star Wars in exchange for Ahsoka being a major role in Disney Star Wars, I think that's true. Because we know how Filoni favors Ahsoka. He does not want her to die, even though I think she should be killed by Darth Vader. Like, I think from a story standpoint, Ahsoka should have been killed by Darth Vader. Like, I mean, Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader and killing Ahsoka. That would have made so much sense from a story perspective. Outside that, there was, if she was gonna die during like the Clone Wars, some people said Order 66, but no, if it was gonna be from like the GI Purge, all that, it should have been Darth Vader who killed her. But as far as during the before that, if it was like, let's say, the Clone Wars show had ended like like a like a year or a few months before Revenge of the Sith, and Ahsoka died, and Anakin blamed the Council for her death because let's say they made some mistake and it led to Ahsoka's death. Let's say the Jedi Temple bombing arc. Let's say it led to Ahsoka being killed, and when her name was cleared and basically everything happened, Anakin just yells at the Council and blames them for Ahsoka's death, and that would have made sense. And but I think Filoni, he chose his own career. He wanted his characters to be a major role in Disney Star Wars, and he sacrificed Star Wars for his own ego. You know, he made his choice. Fans will make us fans will make ours. And the ratings of his stuff will suffer from his decisions. The ratings will suffer from Kathleen Kenney's decisions, from Pablo Hidalgo's decisions, Ryan Johnson's, Jar Jar Abrams, Leslie Headland, anyone else. I mean, the ratings for all Star Wars projects are going to suffer. And I honestly don't think another Star Wars movie will make profit under the current regime at Lucasfilm. I don't think a single Star Wars movie will make profit. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Mandalorian Grogu has the highest odds, but I still think after the reigns of Mandalorian season 3, I think Mandalorian Grogu is going to lose money, and Filoni deserves a lot of blame for that. It sucks. I, you know, I respected a lot of his early work. I was a fan of some of his early work at Lucasfilm, and he made his decisions, and that's on him. That's not on us fans. I still respect his early work. I'm still a fan of Rebels, Mandalorian season 1, 2, Clone Wars, season 1 of Bad Batch. You know, yeah, the stuff that's come since then has tainted the legacy of all that, but you know, all that stuff, the early stuff he did looks is still good. And I expected better from someone who was like the way he's spoken at times. It seemed to be like a big fan of Star Wars. Yes, he's said some things that I don't agree with. You know, a lot of his stuff he says shown that he's a fan of Star Wars and that he highly respected George Lucas. And look at what he's done to Lucas's legacy. I think Kennedy still deserves the most blame. Like Kathleen Kennedy deserves the most blame since she's in charge of Lucasfilm. And Bob Iger deserves a lot of blame since he's the CEO of Disney and was running things for the majority of the Disney's ownership of Star Wars. Like those two deserve more blame. But Ryan Kendall was correct in how Filoni, you know, betrayed the fans. Filoni's a traitor. It sucks. I wish for better from him. Heck, I wish for better from everyone at Lucasfilm. I wish they would all fix things, save Star Wars, but you know that ain't gonna happen. Like basically Lucasfilm needs to basically be purged of most of the people there, and Filoni is someone that sadly needs to go. And it sucks. I would have wished for better from him. And if a purge ever happens, and he decides to you know make things right with the fans, apologize, to do what's right by Star Wars and by George Lucas, then maybe burned bridges can be rebuilt. Maybe. But that doesn't, and so we may forgive at some point, but we should never forget. And, I have no hope that Star Wars will be saved, but if it is ever saved, I'm all for it. And that's it for the video. So yeah, did y'all like this video? Do you have any suggestions of future topics? Do you agree with my takes on Filoni? Do you disagree? Do you have any information that I may have forgotten to mention about Filoni that you want to bring up in the comments? Y'all can do that. Y'all can correct me on any mistakes I've made. And, whether you agree, disagree, yeah, leave all that in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, all of that. and look forward to the next video.